From the campus of the University of Kentucky, you're listening to Behind the Blue. I'm Cody Kaiser with UK Strategic Communications.
The summer tends to be a very busy time for us. We see it as a bit of a downtime in terms of people. Not as many people are on campus, so it gives us an opportunity to really do a lot of in-depth repairs and expansions and a variety of different infrastructure type projects and initiatives. As we go into this fall, the work that we're doing today is nothing that we haven't been planning for the last 6 months. So this has really been an extensive effort that we've been heading up since last fall. So, and I probably talked about this a little bit last year, but we always start with thinking about how last fall went and then building upon that. And so really thinking through what's going to change in terms of what parking is going away as a result of construction or just campus growth, what's the enrollment, what's the programmatic increases that are going to impact our campus moving into next year, and then what opportunities do we have.
That's Lance Broking, Director of Transportation Services at the University of Kentucky. Last September, Lance appeared on Behind the Blue to talk about the variety of challenges his department faces, from expanding student housing, major medical center construction, or increased sustainability initiatives. As the University of Kentucky continues to evolve, so too must the systems that help people navigate it all. With summer offering a brief window for more intensive work, UK Transportation Services is executing projects ranging from garage expansions and surface lot renovations to shuttle route adjustments and parking zone realignments. On this episode of Behind the Blue, Broking returns to provide insight into the planning and decision-making that affects how students, faculty, staff, and visitors get to, from, and around campus. He also discusses how his team stays proactive, responds to feedback, and prepares for a more connected, sustainable future. Lance Broking, thanks so much for taking the time again to sit down. It's summertime, a time when many people at the university slow down a little bit, or maybe they are not here on campus, but you just seem to accelerate the things you're working on more and more. When last we spoke, we talked a lot about the complexity of UK's campus and the concerns there. Have there been any changes as far as like how your team is structured or staffed? Been anything moving in the future towards that?
Yeah. So first of all, really appreciate being able to come back. So round two. I've really enjoyed a lot of this past year, but with I think most people that have been on campus for any length of time know the campus is always in transition of some sort. And so we're always looking to the future and spending a lot of time and effort really focused on addressing that in advance. The worst thing to do is wait till it hits you and then be reactive. So always trying to be proactive. One of the things I think over the past year that's really helped me is as campus continues to grow, I've just found myself being busier and busier. And so we've been doing some internal restructuring as well, and had the opportunity last year to add a deputy director. So Sarah Nykirk has joined our team, and Sarah's been a long-term university employee, primarily spent most of her days in the auxiliary world. But even though transportation tends to be its own unique industry, I think understanding university environment, and even more specifically understanding University of Kentucky environment, is hugely important. So she's been able to hit the ground running, and it's been a tremendous asset to the organization already. So a year in and making great strides.
Well, I spoke to Sarah not too long ago about a specific area on campus that a parking lot that I actually have a pass for. And so I knew that there were a lot of things that were changing and a lot of transition going on. Kind of in a big picture, as far as summer maintenance goes and summer plans moving into the fall, can you give us some general updates on repairs, updates that are being made to parking lots, garages, and kind of the transit infrastructure over the summer?
Sure. So as you kind of mentioned, the summer tends to be a very busy time for us. We see it as a bit of a downtime in terms of people. Not as many people are on campus, so it gives us an opportunity to really do a lot of in-depth repairs and expansions and a variety of different infrastructure type projects and initiatives. As we go into this fall, the work that we're doing today is nothing that we haven't been planning for the last 6 months. So this has really been an extensive effort that we've been heading up since last fall. So, and I probably talked about this a little bit last year, but we always start with thinking about how last fall went and then building upon that. And so really thinking through what's going to change in terms of what parking is going away as a result of construction or just campus growth, what's the enrollment, what's the programmatic increases that are going to impact our campus moving into next year, and then what opportunities do we have. So that's really where we start. And so this summer, as you kind of mentioned, hit the ground running as soon as graduation hit, starting to do a lot of those infrastructure type projects. Really this summer, whereas last summer we really focused on a lot of surface lot expansions. And so we did in the neighborhood of 750 parking spaces through efficiency projects, parking expansions, new parking areas we were able to add into our inventory. Less about that this summer and more about kind of upkeep of our existing facilities. And so you'll see a lot of hopeful improvements in our parking lots that exist. And so doing some resurfacing in the Scott Street area, behind the Coliseum, the Columbia Avenue area, library visitor lot. So a lot of resurfacing, trying to maintain our assets really well. We'll get a little bit of efficiency through some of those projects and adding a few spaces here and there, but by and large, just really a facelift on those facilities. Each summer, we also do pretty extensive maintenance in our parking garages. And so as soon as graduation hits, we hit the ground running on getting those projects underway. And so we've got $1.75 million worth of construction improvements, maintenance type, condition assessment, repairs going on in our capital assets, our parking garages. And so that's really spanning the breadth of all 8 of our parking garages right now. Some of them, actually this summer, we're not doing any maintenance on Sports Center garage because it's closed for expansion projects. So that's kicked off this past spring as well. So you'll start to see some improvements there as well. But really just this summer is all about trying to get our facilities up and ready for the fall semester. When I think about kind of big projects, whereas last summer I kind of referenced as the summer of the parking lot, this is really the summer of the parking structure. So really doing a lot of effort in our parking structure. So in addition to our capital maintenance project we've got going on this summer, I mentioned that we're already, we've closed down during the summer our Sports Center parking garage and are doing a 1-level vertical expansion and a 5-level horizontal expansion to the west, adding about 1,200 parking spaces in that facility. So it will be closed during the summer. It'll reopen this fall, not completed, but we'll be able to retain all of our original spaces back into the inventory for the next academic year while the project continues doing its horizontal expansion. So that'll be completed in the fall of 26, ready to go for in conjunction with also the opening of the new residence hall just across the street over in the Sports Center area, the Complex Drive area.
So talking about Sports Center garage, I know that the last time we talked, one of the things that really kind of we touched on was you're dealing with finite space with the university because we're locked on all sides by the city of Lexington. So this, I'm sure people listening, that would come to mind of, well, how are we expanding this because it's in a space surrounded by other facilities on campus, but those facilities have kind of been shifting too. So how does that kind of work into some of the changes that are being made in general in that area?
Yeah, so the Sports Center garage is actually a combination project. It's a public-private partnership that involves both the Transportation Services Department as well as our partners over in Student Success and Campus Recreation. So it's both a 1,200 space expansion to the parking structure as well as I don't want to misquote the size, but a pretty substantial expansion to the Johnson Center adjacent to it. And so really we've rethought that entire area between the parking structure and the Johnson Center. If you're familiar with the area, there were, I think, eight tennis courts that were between the two facilities that were lightly used, but actually had been growing in terms of popularity, particularly as the onset of pickleball as a an exciting sport that's kind of up and coming. And so in having conversations with student recreation about maybe a higher and better use of that tennis court area. They were supportive of us expanding the parking structure to the west, closer to their facility, but also needing to replace those facilities. And so we've worked closely with our facilities management group, as well as our capital construction and our student rec group, and we're going to be replacing the tennis courts with some pickleball courts that are going to be moving a little bit to the south, but in the same general vicinity of it. So really an opportunity to kind of do an entire facelift of that area, so everybody kind of improves as part of this project.
And a lot of student housing over there, a lot of students that are dependent upon parking. This, it would seem like it would be really beneficial as far as having that open up so that you can park more students there and alleviate some of the pressure on some of the other parking areas around campus, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. So really the onus of doing this parking structure expansion has really been focused on replacing the University Drive garage, or PS1. Some people refer to it as the VA garage, the oldest parking garage on campus. It sits in the footprint of the expansion area for the Chandler Hospital expansion. And so as part of an enabling project, that garage needs to come down to be able to support the expansion. So getting ahead of that, replacing the spaces in the Sports Center garage. And so the parking structure 1, or the University Drive garage, has about 750 parking spaces in it. We're building 1,200 spaces, so we're also adding some additional spaces in there. But it's not really, when you think about parking on campus, it's always this, we've referenced it as kind of water. As one thing, dams up, you move the parking, it just kind of flows into a different area. And so when we think about losing 750 plus parking spaces on that area on the Chandler Hospital side of University Drive, and we're building spaces further away in the Sports Center area, it's not simply a one-for-one swap where employees are going to move over there. We have to be more mindful about land use, proximity, road capacity. And so one of the things that we really think about with the Sports Center garage is, if we were to put immediately put 800 employees in there that all come and go at the same time, the road system simply wouldn't handle that volume of people. And so we have to be very strategic about how we utilize the spaces. So to your point, as we build the new student residence hall in that area, it makes sense that we might move students that are going to be living in that area closer to where they're going to live, which will free up other spaces on campus that are already serviced by both good pedestrian routes as well as our campus transit system to get people to and from where they work. So that's kind of, as we think about the future, when this garage opens in 26, it'll be a mixed-use facility, heavily leaning towards students just because of the flexibility when they come and go, and then freeing up some stadium areas that are probably closer to the north, which is where the hospital expansion project's coming. And so it'll give us a chance to rethink the allocations in that area.
I want to, before we get too far away from it, I want to circle back to something that you were talking about earlier. It made me think of this. So you kind of have these three elements that I was looking at. You have limited summer time window. You have a certain number of staff who can address certain things, or personnel that can address something, and then a set amount of resources in funding in order to do this. So when Transportation Services looks at things that need renovation or things that need to upgrade or upkeep on campus, I know that on one side you have a list that your team is putting together of, like, this needs work, we need to repair this, we've got to patch this area, we got to do these things. And at the same time, you also have people in the campus community who are using these lots, these facilities, who also may have concerns, or they see something, they want to report it, they want to let you know. And I know that there's some overlap of this, but not always, because there's probably a lot of things that just people, everyday users of parking structure, for example, they don't see certain things that you guys see that would be like, this is something that needs addressing. So I know there's some overlap, but not always. So how do you prioritize some of those things? And I ask that in the sense of, like, I'm sure people probably see work going on and they're like, well, I don't know why they're working on this, because this lot that I park in all the time has this problem. So I know it all has to go on a list and it all has to kind of be ranked. How do you approach that?
That's a really good question. It's a bit of a art as opposed to a science, but I would say that we're very thoughtful and forward thinking about our capital construction. So when we're thinking about renovations to our existing capital facilities or our parking garages, because of the nature of those facilities and how we need to maintain safety, that's always our first priority, is maintaining safety. And so when we think about spending dollars, we have committed those dollars years in advance. And so we have a very robust master maintenance plan where we work with a third-party engineering consultant who comes in and evaluates our parking structures every 5 years, does a really in-depth structural analysis and condition assessment, and they put together a 10-year plan, really a 5-year focus plan and a 5-year forward-thinking plan. And so as we think about budgeting for those 10 years, we've got dollars committed moving forward in 10 years. And so we build our budget around those numbers, saying these are monies that we have to spend. And so I've always felt very good and very comfortable about the fact that our capital facilities are in really good shape and well maintained. That doesn't mean that surprises don't happen, but we've got engineering consultants in the garages every year, and we have our contractors in there doing improvements. And so I feel very comfortable with that approach. But then the other stuff that you talk about is, there's always this forward-thinking nature of the condition of our existing parking lots and what's getting taken offline as a result of construction expansion. What are we going to maintain for some period of time, and we want to invest back in those facilities to make sure they're in good working condition. And then even beyond all of that, what about all the ancillary stuff like lighting? Sometimes our newer parking lot have very modern LED lights, but some of our older facilities have high pressure sodium or metal halide lights or not as good of lighting. And so we're always thinking about how do we improve the value of some of our existing facilities. And so it's really just a thoughtful process that myself and my staff, we sit around each fall and we start looking into the future as well about how do we want to invest our money. And depending on each year, in terms of the finance piece, what do we have available, and then how do we allocate those funds? So really, it's a big picture of where do we get the biggest bang for our buck, what has the highest need, and then what honestly has the longevity. What do we think that makes sense to invest significant funds in? So, for instance, the Scott Street lot has been one of these lots that's been in poor condition for a number of years, but it seems like every time we ramped up to spend money, then I hear inklings out in the facilities world about maybe something getting built there, and then that goes away, and so we ramp it up again. And so we play a little bit of that battle, but making sure that my staff is very attuned to what's going on in facilities and the capital planning process, and making sure that we're not investing money into sinking projects that aren't going to be around for a while. And so that's a big component of how we think about the future and where the dollars get spent.
I know that when we spoke back in the fall, you mentioned, or late summer, you mentioned kind of an in-depth fall analysis to look at occupancy and anticipating shortfalls. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of what that analysis revealed about how parking's being utilized and kind of how it may have shifted your concerns or made you kind of change your plans or develop your plans as you move ahead?
Sure. So as I mentioned before, each fall we spend a lot of time and effort. Our staff is out in the field, counting numbers, watching from 8 a.m. until 3 in the afternoon what the progression of occupancy looks like in our parking facilities, and that helps kind of inform how we deal with the rest of the year as well as how we plan into the future year. Because really everything's built off of how did last fall go? What do we expect to change going into next fall? And then how do we make adjustments? Some things were a little bit different this past fall than what we anticipated. So the biggest change was as we went into the summer, we expected to lose 500 parking spaces in the orange lot associated with the USDA project. And that's an external project that's managed through the Corps of Engineers, that the university is a recipient of the benefits, but it's primarily being paid for and managed through an outside project team. And so that project bid last summer and came in over budget, and so they paused it. And so we went into the last semester actually with more parking spaces than we thought we were going to have, which you would think would be a really great problem to have, and it was. I mean, I think if you ask anybody that parked on South Campus, they would have said that last year they felt there was a little more elbow room. But at the same time, they may also say that there were a lot of vacancies in places that you wouldn't have expected vacancies. And that's primarily because as we went into the fall semester, we had already made all these plans about who was going to park where. And then when the project didn't happen, then we had to rethink that. And we say, okay, do we want to shake everything up and really create mass confusion only to have it change again this fall, or do we want to just kind of move forward? And so we really had a lot of in-depth conversations about what that looked like. At the end of the day, we decided to keep things the way they were. And so if you're an employee who parked on South Campus in the periphery areas, you may have seen excess capacity in the red lot, in the south red lot, or in the orange lot, more so than you would have expected. If you're a student, you may have seen that and been frustrated. Why can't I park in those excess spaces and I have to park further away? And so as we think about going into this summer, and we're thinking about, the USDA project is going to be going back out to bid soon. And so we anticipate losing those spaces again this year, and I fully expect to lose them. When we lose them, the timeline of that will affect, a little bit. But generally speaking, our plans moving forward is to be more flexible with the area in the stadium. Instead of defining specific areas for students and employees, we're going to be a little more open with allowing anybody with a periphery permit to park in certain areas. So the orange lot will maintain as a employee periphery lot, but the other areas of the stadium, the blue lot, the green lot, the red lot, and then our College Way parking lots, they'll all be student periphery parking and employee periphery parking. And so first come, first serve in all of those areas. And so this will be an interesting test to see, how that works. I think internally as we talk about it, the more flexible you can be, the more efficient the parking ends up being. And so it's one of these that the more you are specialized with, this area is only dedicated to this group, you'll see, excess capacity there. And then another lot will be for this group, and you'll see excess capacity there. If you just open it up to everybody, then I think people will use the space as efficiently as possible. And then it becomes very predictable too, as you go through the semester. People can expect, certain times a day, here's what it looks like. And I think, employee behaviors and student parking behaviors, they tend to be very predictable over the long term. And so that's super helpful as well.
When you look at shifting that to the periphery and having that change, do you also have to take into consideration, or what does that do as far as looking at like the shuttle transportation? You're thinking maybe we're going to have an increased kind of presence there, and so is that going to change the schedule of the shuttle running, or cause us to have need for an extra shuttle to actually run?
So I think going into this fall, we had already anticipated some of this last year, and so we adjusted our shuttle routes a little bit last year to be able to accommodate what's going to be happening this year as well. So I feel like we're in a good place to start the year. Keep in mind, buses are one of those things we have ability to kind of flex on. So if we see some things that are unexpected, we have the ability to adjust. And I think that is less burdensome than starting to change lots mid-year on people. So I feel like we're in a really good spot. Generally speaking, I feel like my staff has a pretty good idea of who parks where generally, and whether they take the bus or they leverage some specific areas that I think from a pedestrian standpoint, it makes more sense to park and walk. And so I think we have a pretty good, predictable approach to how we're addressing it from a transit perspective.
And talking about Kroger Field and the lots there, one thing that we talked about last time that I'm sure will be on a lot of people's mind this time is the ongoing challenge of game day parking relocations. So just in general, not just about game day, but just in general, kind of walk through, how do you communicate to students who are new, students who are returning, and then also staff who utilize these lots? What kind of communication or education efforts happen? And then, how does it shift what you do, or does it shift what you do for game days as well?
So we try to be as proactive as possible with all of our communication. So I've got a whole communications team that kills it for us. They're, I think, known across the university as being as proactive as we can possibly be about any impacts to people's parking. So we start the process on communicating game day information well before the semester even starts. So as students are going through the advising conference phase, as they start to apply for their parking permits, once they get their parking permit, we're sharing this information regularly. And so when they show up on campus, they should already be aware of it. Now, we also recognize that there's a lot of information coming at new students and even returning students, and sometimes it's easy to forget. And so we do regular reminders both through the resident advisor staff, and we send targeted emails to specific permit holders to make sure that they're aware that they need to move their vehicles. And we also recognize it's a bit of a hassle for folks too. And so it's not as punitive as you might think. We give people a break. So if they forget once, it's not going to be the end of the world. We'll avoid those citations for their first, foray into forgetting to move their car. And so generally speaking, one of the things I like to share with people is that, people are always frustrated. Like, I paid for that parking space. Why do I have to move my vehicle? And, we always say that keep in mind that there is a rev share agreement that Transportation Services has with our athletics partners as well. And so we do get a portion of the parking revenue they get that comes back into the Transportation Services revenue pool that we can then support our facilities and our initiatives and programs. And so while I completely understand that they've paid for those spaces, the permit fees are artificially low to some degree because we're getting some revenue from athletics as well. And so that helps offset some of that pain. So while, yes, it is accurate that students and employees that park in that area do pay for that parking, so do the fans that are attending the games. And so it's a balance for us.
One of the things I want to ask about too is, are we looking as we move through the summer and into the fall, are there going to be garages or surface lots? I know we talked about Sports Center, but talking about some other maybe surface lots that are undergoing some changes. One that comes to mind is the Pearl Street lot. I kind of want to talk about that, and then also kind of shift over and talk a little bit about Cornerstone Garage and kind of what's on the horizon there as well.
The Sports Center Garage will be back online this fall. So even though it's closed during the summer, it will be closed this summer, and then it'll close again next summer. And that's to facilitate the vertical expansion. So during the summer, this summer and next summer, the contractor team is working hard to get that vertical expansion done. And then once that's complete, we'll open the original garage back so we can do the horizontal expansion both summers. But as we think about surface lots, there's a couple that I mentioned, the orange lot and the potential impact for the USDA project. We also lost the West Transcript parking lot. So it's a small 55 space parking garage at the end of Transcript behind the hospital parking garage. If you're familiar with that area, there's that parking lot went away the day after graduation to support the construction of the Environmental Quality Management Center, which is part of Environmental Health and Safety's group. Their current EQMC facility is located in the footprint of the future Chandler expansion. So like Parking Structure 1, they have to relocate that facility elsewhere to be able to support the growth of the hospital. And so that project obviously has to happen in advance of the hospital project. So it broke ground in early May, lost those parking spaces. To mitigate that to some degree, we have removed the on-street parking or transitioned the on-street parking on Leader Avenue and Press Avenue adjacent to that general area into employee parking. It was metered parking. We've transitioned that to employee parking to offset some of those losses. And then you mentioned the Pearl Street lot. So the Pearl Street lot is the other lot that's going to be impacted or transitioned this summer. It's moving from a employee core lot into a purely a visitor parking facility. And there's a couple of reasons behind that. One is due to some construction that was happening with the human resources up at the old Lexington Theological Seminary, Bosworth, and the Mandrel Hall area. We had to reduce the number of core permits that we sold in that area. So we had some excess capacity now that project is over. And so it gives us the ability to transition some people that were parking in Pearl Street into the seminary area, which is adjacent to it, and allows us to transition that small parking lot on the corner of Pearl Street and South Limestone across from Memorial Hall into purely a visitor facility. And what that does for us is we've had challenges in the past with people understanding that it's both a small visitor area with some metered parking as well as a core area. And so there was always this tension where people didn't really read the signs correctly and were confused. And so it created this environment where it felt like, I think people thought we were trying to trap people. And then there's also a pretty sizable need in that part of campus for visitor parking, particularly as we think about the area behind Funkhauser getting more and more dense and harder to get to. All those academic programs and support facilities that are back there just don't have much availability of predictable visitor parking. And so having that parking lot on that corner will help support that as well. So I think that's going to be a good transition going into this year. And we'll send out communications on that and do plenty of promotion on that. But looking forward to that change as well. So those are kind of the big, and I wouldn't even suggest those are really big, but those are the minor transitions that are going to happen in our surface lots this summer.
And that transition, I can just say as an observer, I know is probably going to reduce probably a large amount of citations that people get, because our offices used to be right across the street from that, and we used to see that all the time, to what you were talking about. And that's actually the conversation that Sarah Nykirk and I had, was kind of about some of that students or visitors, people would park there and because there was a pay box, they would pay for it. So they've already paid for parking, but they're parking in a spot that's not marked, which the marking is, if you're looking, it's, to me, I thought was clearly designated, but I can see where a lot of people would mistake that and pay for it and then park somewhere else in that. So I can imagine that a lot of those citations are probably going to drop off, because that tends to be that lot it gets a lot of business, a lot of activity there because of its proximity to that specific part of campus.
And we avoided a lot of citations in that lot. And so, I think it created frustration on everybody's front. You get a citation that you maybe parked not intentionally and you parked incorrectly and got a citation. So you're frustrated. And we put a lot of work into, trying to maintain the parking availability for the people that paid for that area. And so we get frustrated, and then somebody calls and they're frustrated and we're frustrated. We avoid the citation. So now we've lost revenue, but we put effort into it. It was a lose-lose for everybody. And so this gives us an opportunity to rethink that area and maybe right size it for the right group.
And then Cornerstone, as we were going to talk about, that's another place that sees a lot of visitors, especially during orientation, other high traffic events. But there are some specific challenges with that garage that aren't necessarily challenges that we can address on our own. We have to kind of work with the city. So I was going to ask a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so we've really spent a lot of time thinking about Cornerstone on a variety of different fronts, both from a condition perspective as well as a functionality, operational perspective. And so, to your point, if we think about that facility as the primary visitor parking facility for our campus, I think we have an obligation to make sure that we're providing a really great experience for people. So take aside, the employee and the students that park in that facility and their experience. Our visitors are also experiencing the same thing. And so we want to make sure that's really a top-notch facility. And when I think about, it was constructed in the late 90s, the original portion of the garage, and it's been expanded twice since then. And so some of the original finishes still exist in the garage. And so I think, it's time to really rethink the look of the facility. And so we've been really spending some time talking with our facilities group about really how to invest some money, some resources, some time into giving a little bit of a facelift for the original garage, just because we recognize that's the first experience a lot of our visitors, and as we think about the summer that's coming up, all of our students coming through their advising conference, that's their and their family's first introduction to the university, and want to make sure that's first class. And so certainly that's a component of that experience. The secondary component is what you experience when it's time to leave. And during the summer, it generally isn't as much of a problem. But as we think about going into the busyness of the fall semester, and with so many things going on campus and the traffic congestion that happens around campus, we've experienced a lot of challenges, primarily during the evening rush hour, the evening commute period, that has given a lot of frustration to our users of that facility in getting in and out of the garage. And so we've really spent a lot of time doing some in-depth assessment of what we could do. There is no silver bullet. A lot of times, the frustration is the gates are down and then there's a backup, and people just assume it's because the gates aren't working or it's the volume of exiting traffic. But the reality is usually it's a combination of things that lead to the backups in the garage. And they're hard to predict. It could be that there's a car that's broken down on Broadway. And just as simple as that, if it's backing up Broadway and then it backs up to Bolivar backs up into the garage and the garage blocks the exits to Limestone, it's just this combination of things that can happen. We've seen things from a truck that's delivering to two keys that's parked, in a drive lane that can cause a backup. We've seen people that run the red light and then stack up in front of the traffic, so the traffic on Limestone can't go north, and so that will back up into the garage. There's just all these different things, and it doesn't take much. It could be that in combination with a visitor at the exit who doesn't really understand how to pay, and those two things back the garage up, during that period. And so our goal has been to try to minimize all of those issues to the extent we can. So what can we control? What can we work with the city to control? And then how do we just mitigate that? We still have an obligation to monitor it, and so we've both been talking about using some manual, some old-fashioned an attendant on site to watch the gates and raise the gates if there's a period of backup, to thinking about it from a technology standpoint. Is there some predictive analytics that we can use that might generate some decisions within the system that automatically happen, so it doesn't, require manual intervention? So we've been looking at that as well. So some low-hanging fruit out there that I think we can do. There's some internal striping in the garage. We've taken a few spaces out to add a little more stacking distance in some areas. We've generated, particularly at the exits that move out towards Bolivar, towards the west, adding additional stacking there and doing a better job of defining where the lanes are to add additional stacking. And then I think the thing that we've heard the most about is how can we improve the exits out towards that Bolivar exit, because the traffic light that is there doesn't cycle enough to pass enough people through. There's only so many people that can get through the gate and stack at the light before the light changes, and then usually you can get 6 or 7 people through that before you have to start metering people through the exit. And so how do we speed that process? And so we've been working with the city to define that you can turn left on red there from the left lane, and that'll help with some of that throughput. Also working with our parking control vendor on the gate access. And we've got our LPR cameras that are reading plates, trying to speed up that throughput, making sure that everybody that is eligible to park in the garage has their plates registered, so that process is as seamless as it can possibly be, because it's all about throughput. When you get a break in the traffic, you want as many vehicles to flow out as possible. And so sometimes that's when raising the gates does make sense. If there's a hiccup in the system or a road system issue that's a problem, sometimes it does make sense to raise the gates so that people can flow out. The problem with predictably raising the gates, if we raised the gates every day at 5 o'clock, that would be problematic, because then, our students are very smart, and they would find out quickly, and our employees, they'd find out quickly, if I just come in and pull a ticket in the morning and they raise the gates every day at 5, I just have to wait until 5 and then leave. So we have to be mindful of that as well as we think about all these things. So really, as you mentioned, it's just a combined approach. It's working with the city to mitigate as many traffic issues around campus as possible. And then in terms of facility, both in the garage and exterior of the garage, adding additional stacking distance so that we have the ability to push as many cars during those peak periods as possible. And then our equipment manufacturer, how do we, leverage our existing technology to improve things?
Talking about the, not knowing what happens maybe on Broadway or someplace like that, I think everyone's probably experienced being on the interstate somewhere. Traffic slows to a crawl, if not a stop, and then you're slowly moving, and then you suddenly get to a point to where it opens back up, and there's no accident, there's nothing on the road, and you're like, why were we all and you just never know the reason. And I'm not saying that that's the same thing that's happening, but there are oftentimes things that happen in places that you are not aware of and you are not traveling to, but then ripple back and impact where you are. I was going to ask, I think one thing that I've always been curious about when exiting that garage and coming out to go onto Bolivar, where you necessarily have to be as far as, the sidewalk comes through there. And if I'm too far out, maybe there's somebody coming, I'm blocking them. Now I've pulled too far ahead, there's somebody behind, I can't back up to let these people come through. Is there a sensor? Am I on the sensor? What's going to make the light turn? And I think that maybe some people have some confusion about that as well.
Yeah, you're right. There's always that confusion about where you stop to make sure that you're getting the traffic cameras are able to sense you to be able to transition the light. And then even within the garage, we're having issues with our employees and students with the LPR cameras reading the license plates, raising the gates to know exactly where to stop their vehicle so that it maximizes the potential to read their plate correctly. And so I think we have responsibility to make sure that at the exit that we've got the stop bars located in the appropriate spot. And then even at the gate equipment, we've talked about what's the best way do we draw a box? Do we draw a line? Do we put a stop here? How do we communicate that to people? Because again, the more people struggle with it, the more opportunity you have for backups in the area. So how do we streamline all of that?
I know we've been talking for a bit. I want to be mindful of your time. The couple of things I want to kind of wrap up with and ask about really quickly is in 2026, it looks like we're moving to virtual permits at that point. I want to kind of ask about that. And I also kind of in a technology frame of mind, I kind of want to ask about where we are with EVs and charging stations and things like that. I know that's probably been a big part of the conversation as well. And so as we kind of move into a technological future with parking, kind of where are we with those two areas?
Sure. So let me start with the EV discussion because it's kind of top of mind. We've got a request for proposals out right now on the street. In fact, I think the bids are due, or the proposals are due soon. And so we do have a handful of EV charging stations on campus right now. I think we have 3, 2 in Cornerstone and 1 over in the Press Avenue area. Particularly as we have these parking facilities coming online. So our healthcare garage is an 800 space expansion is opening on July 1st, and it has some EV parking there. Our sports center garage will have EV parking. The future cancer center project will have EV parking. And then how do we retrofit some of our existing facilities to add some EV parking? We don't have an official university vendor right now, and so we're using ChargePoint through a partnership with KU right now, Kentucky Utilities. But in having broader conversations, both internally and externally, I think we came to the point where we just felt it was best for us to have our own vendor to service our campus needs. And so we'll be selecting a vendor in the coming weeks. And then as we start to roll out these new facilities, you'll start to see more and more EV charging stations come online. So one of the challenges for us, and we've probably talked about this in a previous conversation, but where do we prioritize those efforts? And so really, we're really focused heavily on our visitor areas, making sure that anyone who's driving to campus as a visitor from out of town, that they have the resources to top off to get back where they came from. And then secondarily, talking through how do we deal with our campus residents. And then lastly, our commuting employees and students who theoretically have the ability to charge elsewhere at home, but occasionally need to top off at work as well. So really focused on those efforts. So, this is one of those stay tuned things that I really mean stay tuned. It'll be forthcoming really soon as we wrap that RFP process up. And then secondarily, you mentioned virtual permits, and that's something we're super excited about. So in fall of 26, we are on our roadmap to go virtual permits, which essentially means that no longer will you have the physical hang tag that you hang from your review mirror and swipe at the permit readers. Instead, everything will be based on your license plate. So your license plate will be your credential that authorizes you parking. And that just gives us so much flexibility. It both gives us flexibility from an enforcement standpoint in terms of being more efficient with our enforcement activities, making sure that we're providing value to people who do pay for parking. And then secondarily, also opening up a wide opportunity for different payment options as well. So right now, if you're a nurse who works a couple days a week and you're buying scratch offs today, that still requires you to interact with our staff and come into the office and scratch off a hang tag, very analog, and in a digital age that doesn't make much sense. And so that will all go through our virtual system, allow you to pay in advance or even same day through our application, and just make that much more seamless. You don't have to come to the office. You just pay when you need it. Also, as we think about students right now, payroll, those of us who are employees and can be on payroll deduction, it makes it where it's very predictable. It just comes out of your paycheck. But if you're a student or you work at the VA and you have to pay up front for your parking, that could be a burden when you start talking about the annual permit fees. And so this will just add another option for people to pay by the month, or buy their parking by the week or by the day, whatever works for them. And so it gives us a lot more flexibility in the future in terms of how we approach that. We also recognize, however, one of the challenges with using the license plate as their credential. Kentucky is a one license plate state, and so that makes it challenging where the plate has to face the aisle for us to be able to read it. And there's a handful of people that really like to back into a parking space, or at the stadium, quite honestly, there's 90-degree parking, and so it's easy to just pull through the parking as well and be ready to go at the end of the day. And so that'll be something that we have to transition kind of the behaviors of our staff as well. Not to say that you can't, we'll still allow people to back into the parking spaces or pull through, but you'll have to have a what we call a vanity plate. And so that'll be something that we work through with the campus community. But I never want to say you can't do something without offering a potential alternative. And so it's a vanity plate that we'll sell that'll have a UK logo on it and a UK specific number, and we'll sell it at cost. This is not a money making effort, but this is really just about creating another opportunity for people who value being able to pull through or back into a parking space. So there's, for all the great things that's coming, we also know there's going to be a little bit of a hassle for people, and we also recognize there's going to be a transition period for that. So plenty of communication to come about that process.
Excellent. Is there anything that I haven't asked that we need to talk about or touch on? Anything you can think of?
Yeah, one thing a couple things that I might want to add. One, and we briefly touched on it, but with the healthcare garage expansion coming online, it's about 800 parking spaces, and it's primarily focused on our patients and visitors. But I think one of the things that's maybe lesser known is there is an expansion to the reserve parking that goes with that. And so we do have some reserve parking for our clinical faculty and senior administrators and physicians. And while that may not affect all of our employees, what it does do is it pulls people that might otherwise qualify but not have the ability to buy a reserve parking permit. It pulls them into a different inventory and then frees up other intermediate parking for other employees. And so it's got this, again, this domino type effect where it may not affect you, but because it affects somebody else, it'll ultimately affect the people, that are at the far reaches of campus in terms of their parking, because that's where we see the margin. Additionally, the parking garage today will still be able to accommodate the patients and visitors. And so we're going to also have an opportunity to sell some core spaces at the top of the garage. And so that'll also just free up additional intermediate spaces down the road for people. So super excited about that transition. We've been working on that over the last couple months. And so even though we're not adding any surface parking lots or any employee necessarily parking lots that you'll see the result of this transition. It'll really help improve parking for some folks. And then I think, let me check my notes. I feel like we've touched on just about everything. One thing that two maybe important things. One is we've had the opportunity to construct a new Wildcat Wheels bike shop. And so that's really a flagship kind of feather in our cap for our bicycle community. So that's going in our sports center garage. So the timing of it wasn't great in the sense that we just finished this brand new shop only to shut the garage down for the summer. But as we ramp up in the fall, that facility will be open, and super proud of it, and really going to be something we want to highlight for the campus community. And then maybe I'll close on maybe the best news of all, which is that as we go into the fall semester, we are not doing any permit fee increases for folks. And so I would be remiss if I didn't mention that as part of this conversation.
We're burying the lead way down in this. I'm sure that's going to be a good news for a lot of people. Excellent. I feel like we did a speed run through everything. There was so much that we covered. I feel like every time we sit down and talk, when we talk through this stuff, there's 3 or 4 more questions that pop into my head that we'll just have to wait until another chance to have a conversation about it.
Sequel 3.
Yeah, so part 3. So Lance Broeking, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And we look forward to all of the changes and all of the new features that are coming when it comes to parking and transportation.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Behind the Blue. Behind the Blue is a joint production of the University of Kentucky and UK Healthcare. For more stories about UK and UK healthcare, visit uknow.uky.edu.